Welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. I know you're here to fall asleep, but before we begin, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Also, do you like the anime-style visuals, or should I go more serious? Let's begin. My name is Roland Kepler, and this happened to me in 2003, a year I thought would be like any other. I'm a small-town cop in a quiet place called North Hill, Maine. My life isn't particularly thrilling, which is how I like it. I spend my days handling minor disputes, patrolling the same routes, and grabbing coffee from the diner where everyone knows my name. I've got a wife, Maggie, and two kids, Sam and Lily, who are the center of my world. We live a simple life, and that suits me just fine. North Hill isn't the kind of place where you expect much excitement. It's a small, unassuming town where folks tend to their own business and leave their doors unlocked at night. So when things started to go sideways, it took a while for anyone to notice. It began with a missing person report. Nothing too unusual. People wander off sometimes. The call came in from Mrs. Lowry, who lived alone on the outskirts of town. She reported that her son, Nathan, who worked in construction, hadn't been home in 2 days. Now Nathan was known to go off on benders now and then, but he'd always show up eventually, hungover and sheepish. "Roland, you mind checking on Nate for me?" Mrs. Lowry's voice crackled over the phone. "Sure thing, Mrs. Lowry. I'll swing by his usual haunts and see if I can track him down," I said, grabbing my keys and heading out. I drove by the usual spots, the bar, his workplace, and even the rundown motel where he sometimes crashed. No sign of Nathan. His co-workers hadn't seen him either, which was odd. They mentioned he'd been acting strange lately, paranoid even, claiming someone was following him. Probably just the booze, I thought, but I made a note to keep digging. Days turned into a week, and there was still no sign of Nathan. Mrs. Lowry was getting frantic, and frankly, so was I. North Hill isn't a place where people just vanish. One night, I got a call from Mike, my buddy and the town's other cop. "Roland, you gotta see this," he said, his voice low and serious. "Meet me at the old Larson place." The Larson place was an abandoned farmhouse on the edge of town, a relic from a bygone era that had fallen into disrepair. It was the kind of place kids dared each other to go on Halloween. I drove there, the headlights cutting through the dark, and met Mike outside. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping out of the car. "You need to see for yourself," he said, leading me inside. The smell hit me first, musty, with a hint of something else, something metallic. Mike pointed his flashlight toward the floor, and that's when I saw it. A dark stain, large and ominous, soaking into the wood. Blood. Lots of it. "Jesus, Mike," I muttered. "Who the hell—" "No idea," he replied. "But it's fresh. Can't be more than a day old." We searched the place top to bottom, but there was nothing else. No body, no clues. Just that massive pool of blood. I called in backup from the county, and soon the place was crawling with forensics, but they didn't find much either. It was like someone had gone to great lengths to clean up, but missed the blood. As the days passed, more people started to disappear. First it was Lila, the waitress from the diner. Then Old Man Thompson, who lived alone. Each case was eerily similar. No signs of struggle, no witnesses, just gone. The town was on edge, and Maggie was scared. I tried to reassure her, but truth be told, I was scared too. One night, while I was on patrol, I got a call from Maggie. "Roland, there's someone outside," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can see a shadow moving near the barn." "Stay inside, lock the doors. I'll be there in 5 minutes," I said, my heart racing as I sped home. I arrived to find Maggie and the kids huddled in the living room, pale and shaken. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to the barn, gun drawn. The moon was high, casting long, eerie shadows. As I approached the barn, I heard a rustling noise, followed by a faint whisper. I swung the door open, shining the light into the darkness. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my gut. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a figure stepped into the light. It was a man, disheveled and dirty, with wild eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He was thin, almost skeletal, and his clothes were torn and bloody. "Nathan?" I asked, barely recognizing him. "Help me," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "He's coming." "Who's coming?" I asked, stepping closer. But before he could answer, he collapsed to the ground, unconscious. I called for an ambulance and had Nathan taken to the hospital. He was in bad shape, but alive. When he finally came to, he told a story that sent chills down my spine. Nathan claimed he had been taken by a man who called himself the Collector. This man, he said, would abduct people and hold them in an underground bunker somewhere in the woods. He would keep them there, feeding them just enough to survive until he decided it was time to collect them. Nathan had managed to escape, but barely. I reported everything to the county sheriff, and a search was organized. We combed through the woods for days but found nothing. The disappearances continued, and the town's fear grew. It was like living in a nightmare, knowing there was someone out there, watching, waiting. One evening, I was at home trying to relax with Maggie and the kids when the power went out. The sudden darkness was unnerving, and I reached for my flashlight. The phone rang and I answered it, my heart pounding. "Roland, it's Mike. You need to get to the station now," he said, urgency in his voice. I grabbed my keys and told Maggie to stay put, then drove to the station as fast as I could. When I arrived, Mike was there with a look on his face I'd never seen before. Fear. "We got him," he said. "We got the Collector." "Where?" I asked, almost not believing it. "Up at the old quarry. You're not going to believe this, Roland." We drove to the quarry, a place long abandoned and overgrown. There, in a hidden clearing, we found a makeshift bunker, just like Nathan had described. Inside, we found the missing townspeople, some alive, some not. The sight was horrific, and it took everything I had to keep it together. The Collector himself was there too, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor that was chilling. He didn't resist arrest, didn't say a word. He just smiled, a cold, empty smile, as we took him away. The aftermath was a blur of activity, rescue operations, media frenzy, and endless questions. The town struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Families grieved, and some semblance of normalcy began to return, but it was a long road. Nathan and the other survivors needed time to heal, both physically and mentally. The Collector, whose real name turned out to be Malcolm Grant, was tried and convicted, sentenced to life in prison without parole. The horror he inflicted on our town would never be forgotten, but we took solace in knowing he would never hurt anyone again. As for me, I went back to my routine, but things were different. I was different. The quiet nights of North Hill now held an undercurrent of unease. I took comfort in my family, in the simple joys of everyday life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had brushed up against something truly evil. My name is Dale Merrick, and this happened to me back in 1998, when I was just starting out as a deputy in Baxter, Colorado. Fresh out of the academy, I thought I knew what the world was like. Small-town law enforcement, I figured, would be straightforward. Drunks, domestic disputes, the occasional petty theft. It was the kind of place where everybody knew your name, and you could leave your doors unlocked. I couldn't have been more wrong. I grew up around here. My dad ran the local hardware store, and my mom was a school teacher. Baxter was quiet, and that's the way folks liked it. Even though it was a small town, it had its fair share of characters. There was old Jerry Donovan, who swore he'd been abducted by aliens, and Miss Evelyn, who read palms and tea leaves for anyone who'd listen. But for the most part, life was predictable. I got the call around 8 p.m. A couple of kids had gone missing up near Bitter Creek just outside of town. Bitter Creek wasn't a place you'd find on any tourist map. It was dense, rugged, and easy to get lost in. Local lore had it that the place was cursed, but then again, every small town has its ghost stories. "Dale, you better get out there," said Sheriff Tomlinson over the radio. "Parents are frantic, got the whole town stirred up." I grabbed my flashlight and headed out in my cruiser. The drive up to Bitter Creek was uneventful. The sun had dipped below the horizon and the sky was awash of deep purples and blues. I radioed in my position as I parked near the trailhead. The search party was already there. Parents, neighbors, a few high school kids who volunteered to help. I spotted the kids' parents, the Reeds. Mrs. Reed was sobbing, clutching her husband's arm, while Mr. Reed stared blankly into the woods. "All right, folks," I said, trying to muster some authority. "Let's spread out and cover as much ground as we can. Stay within sight of each other and keep your flashlights on." We fanned out into the forest. I paired up with a guy named Sam Pritchard, a local who knew the area well. Sam was a big man, built like a linebacker, and he carried a hunting rifle slung over his shoulder. As we walked, the woods seemed to close in around us. The further we went, the quieter it got. No birds, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just the crunch of our boots on the underbrush and the occasional snap of a twig. "Ever hear the stories about this place?" Sam asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah, but I don't put much stock in them," I replied. "Ghosts and curses are just stories people tell to keep kids out of trouble." Sam chuckled. "Maybe so. But there's something off about these woods. Always has been." We continued deeper, calling out the kids' names, Ryan and Emily. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but more trees and shadows. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon something. A small clearing with an old, dilapidated cabin in the center. "Didn't know there was a cabin out here," I said, shining my light on the weathered structure. "Me neither," Sam replied, looking uneasy. We approached cautiously. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung loosely on its hinges. I pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly, breaking the silence. Inside, the air was musty and thick. My flashlight revealed a single room, sparsely furnished. A table, a couple of chairs, and a rusty wood stove. But what caught my eye was a small trap door in the floor. "Think they could be down there?" Sam asked, his voice low. "Only one way to find out," I said, trying to keep my nerves in check. I pulled the trapdoor open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The smell that wafted up was foul, damp earth and rot. I went first, flashlight in one hand, the other on my service revolver. The basement was small, more like a root cellar. Dirt walls, a low ceiling, and in the corner, a pile of old burlap sacks. But it wasn't the sacks that made my blood run cold. It was what was next to them. A pair of small shoes covered in dirt. "Ryan! Emily!" I called out, but there was no response. Sam joined me, his flashlight sweeping the room. "Jesus, Dale, what the hell is this place?" Before I could answer, we heard a noise from above, a shuffling followed by the creak of the cabin door closing. We exchanged a glance, and I drew my gun. "Stay behind me," I whispered, heading back up the stairs. As I reached the top, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was dark, the only light coming from our flashlights. I scanned the room, but it was empty. The door was closed, just as we'd left it. "What the—" Sam started, but I motioned for him to be quiet. We stood there, listening. Then we heard it. A faint sound like someone whispering. It was coming from outside. I moved to the window and peeked through a crack in the boards. In the dim light of our flashlights, I saw a figure standing just at the edge of the clearing, barely visible among the trees. "Who's out there?" I called, stepping towards the door. No response. The figure didn't move. "Stay here," I told Sam and stepped outside, gun raised. I approached slowly, keeping my light trained on the figure. As I got closer, I could see it was a man, tall and gaunt, with long, unkempt hair. His clothes were tattered and his eyes were wide, almost wild. "Who are you?" I demanded, but he just stood there staring at me. Suddenly, he lunged at me. I fired a shot, but he was fast, too fast. He knocked me to the ground and my flashlight went flying. I struggled to get a grip on him, but he was strong, unnaturally strong. I could hear Sam shouting and then the sound of his rifle firing. The man let out a cry and rolled off me, clutching his side. Sam helped me to my feet, and we both trained our lights on the man. He was on the ground, writhing in pain, but still glaring at us with those wild eyes. "Who are you?" I asked again, but he just grinned, blood oozing from his mouth. "Where are the kids?" Sam demanded, kicking the man's side. He let out a wheeze, then laughed, a low, chilling sound. "Too late," he rasped. "They're mine now." We didn't have time to process what he meant. A noise from the cabin made us both turn. Ryan and Emily stood in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. "Run," I shouted, and they bolted towards us. The man tried to get up, but Sam leveled his rifle and fired again, hitting him square in the chest. The man fell back, motionless. I grabbed the kids, and we ran back to the trailhead, not stopping until we were sure we were safe. By the time we got back to town, the story had spread. The kids were safe, but traumatized. They didn't say much, just that they'd been taken by the man in the woods and held in that cabin. No one knew who he was or where he came from. The cabin was searched, but there was no sign of the man's body. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. The town was on edge for weeks, but eventually, life returned to normal. The kids recovered, though they never spoke of what happened that night. As for me, I stayed on as a deputy, but I never forgot that night. Every time I patrolled near Bitter Creek, I felt a chill run down my spine. I kept my gun close and my eyes open, always watching, always waiting, because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. My name is Wade Erickson, and I'm a small-town cop in Bramblewood, a quiet place nestled somewhere between anonymity and serenity. I wasn't always a cop. Grew up here, left for a while, tried my hand at college, but life had other plans. Came back, took up the badge, and I've been serving ever since. Not much happens here, and that's usually just fine by me. But one night things took a turn I never expected. It was a regular Tuesday, I think. Not that the day matters much when your routine is as steady as mine. I'd grabbed my usual coffee from May's Diner and headed to the station. Bramblewood's population is small, so our force is equally tiny. It was just me and Officer Randall, an old-timer who'd seen more years in uniform than I'd been alive. We spent most days handling minor disputes and the occasional drunk, nothing major. This night, though, was different. It started with a call from an out-of-towner. A woman named Clarissa Moss had come to visit her grandmother and found her missing. Mrs. Moss was in her late 80s, known around town as Grammy Moss. She was as sharp as a tack, still driving herself to church on Sundays. So, when Clarissa reported her missing, it sent a ripple through the calm waters of Bramblewood. I took the call and told Randall to cover the station. He grumbled something about young folks and their missing keys, but agreed. I grabbed my coat, the night air already biting. Clarissa met me outside Grammy Moss's house, a quaint little cottage with a white picket fence. She was pacing, her face a mask of worry. "Wade, right?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That's me." "Let's go inside and take a look," I said, trying to keep my tone calm and reassuring. The house was neat, everything in its place, but there were signs that something was off. The back door was ajar, a chilling breeze creeping through. A few knickknacks were scattered on the floor, unusual for Grammy Moss, who was meticulous about her home. "She never leaves without locking up," Clarissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's check the rest of the house," I suggested, leading the way. We searched every room, but there was no sign of her. It felt like she had just vanished. No note, no message, nothing. As we were about to head back to the living room, Clarissa stopped me. "There's one more place." "The basement?" "She doesn't go down there often, but maybe." We headed down the narrow staircase. The basement was musty, filled with old furniture and boxes of memories. In the corner, I noticed something odd, a trap door partially hidden behind an old wardrobe. "Did you know about this?" I asked. Clarissa shook her head, eyes wide with fear and confusion. I pulled the wardrobe aside, the trap door creaking open with a reluctant groan. Below, a ladder descended into darkness. "Stay here," I told her. "I'll check it out." I climbed down, flashlight in hand, and found myself in a small, hidden room. The air was thick and the walls were lined with old newspapers and strange symbols. In the center of the room was a table, and on it a journal. I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the cryptic entries. They were Grammy Moss's, but they spoke of things that made my skin crawl. Strange visitors, rituals, warnings. I heard a noise behind me and spun around, but it was just Clarissa, unable to stay put. She gasped when she saw the room. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know, but we need to get back upstairs. Now." As we climbed out, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt very wrong. When we reached the living room, I radioed Randall to come over. He arrived quickly, his expression turning serious as he took in the scene. "We need to find her, Wade," he said, "and fast." We decided to search the woods behind the house. Grammy Moss loved walking there, and it seemed like the next logical place to look. Clarissa insisted on coming with us, and despite my reservations, I agreed. The three of us set out, flashlights cutting through the night. The woods were silent except for the crunch of leaves under our feet. We called out her name, our voices echoing in the stillness. Then we found something that made my blood run cold, a small makeshift altar with candles still burning and what looked like dried blood. Clarissa let out a sob and Randall muttered a curse under his breath. "What the hell is this?" I said, more to myself than anyone else. "This ain't right, Wade," Randall said, his voice low. "This is something bad." We heard a rustling nearby and turned our lights toward the sound. A figure stood there, half hidden by the trees. It was a man, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. He didn't move, just watched us. "Who are you?" I called out, my hand instinctively reaching for my gun. The man didn't answer, just smiled, a slow, chilling smile. Then he turned and disappeared into the woods. "We need to go after him," Clarissa said, her voice trembling with fear and determination. "No," I said firmly. "We need to get back to the house and call for backup. This is too much for us alone." We hurried back, the eerie silence of the woods pressing in on us. When we reached the house, I called the state police, explaining the situation as best as I could. They promised to send help, but it would take time. We barricaded ourselves inside, waiting. Hours passed like days, the tension thick in the air. Clarissa stayed close, her eyes never leaving the window. Randall paced, muttering under his breath. Then, just before dawn, we heard it, a loud crash from the basement. I grabbed my flashlight and gun, motioning for Randall to follow. Clarissa wanted to come too, but I told her to stay put, to lock the door behind us. We descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The hidden room was just as we had left it, but now the trap door was wide open, and the ladder had been pulled up. "He's down here," Randall said, his voice barely a whisper. We moved cautiously, our flashlights scanning the darkness. The man was there, standing by the table, holding the journal. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. He looked up, his eyes empty. I'm here to finish what she started. Before we could react, he lunged at us. The fight was brutal, chaotic. Randall managed to get a few good hits in, but the man was unnaturally strong. I fired my gun, the shot echoing in the confined space. The man fell, clutching his chest, but the look in his eyes remained hauntingly calm. Randall and I dragged him upstairs, tying him up until the state police arrived. When they did, they took one look at the scene and called for more backup. They searched the woods and found more altars, more signs of dark rituals. Grammy Moss was never found, and the man we captured refused to speak, his identity and motives remaining a chilling mystery. Clarissa left town soon after, unable to stay in a place that held so much darkness. Randall retired a few months later, the events of that night leaving a mark on his soul. As for me, I stayed. Someone had to keep watch, to make sure that whatever evil lurked in Bramblewood was kept at bay. I still patrol the streets, still grab my coffee from May's diner. But there's a weight to it all now, a shadow that never quite leaves. My name is Eldon Proctor, and this happened to me back in 2009 when I was working as a cop in a sleepy little town in Northern California. Before I dive into the details, you should know a bit about me. I'm a guy who loves a good cheeseburger and a cold beer, and I'm a die-hard Giants fan. I grew up around here, went to high school just a few miles from the station, and thought I'd be a mechanic like my old man. Instead, I found myself in law enforcement, and to be honest, I liked the routine and the occasional excitement. The day started out like any other. I was in the middle of my shift, patrolling the streets in my cruiser. The town, with its quiet charm, had a way of making you feel like nothing bad could ever happen. Trees lined the streets, and the air smelled like pine and fresh-cut grass. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest crime was usually some teenager tagging the old water tower. I got a call about a missing person just after lunch. Missing person cases were rare around here, usually just a teenager who decided to take a road trip without telling anyone. But this one felt different. The call came from a woman named Rose Lydell, a regular at the diner I often visited. She was frantic, saying her husband, Frank, hadn't come home last night. Frank was a retired firefighter, a sturdy guy in his late 60s. Everyone knew him, and everyone liked him. He'd gone out for a walk the previous evening and never came back. I assured Rose that I'd do everything I could to find him and headed over to their house on Elm Street to get more details. When I arrived, Rose was beside herself. She kept wringing her hands and pacing. I tried to calm her down, asking about Frank's usual routes and if he'd mentioned anything unusual lately. She said he liked to walk through the woods behind their house, a peaceful spot with trails leading down to the river. I started my search there. The woods were thick and dense, the kind of place where you could easily get turned around if you weren't careful. I walked the trails, calling out Frank's name, hoping he'd simply taken a spill and needed help getting back up. But as I ventured deeper, a sense of unease crept in. The woods were too quiet, the usual sounds of birds and rustling leaves absent. After a couple of hours with no sign of Frank, I radioed for backup. My partner Joe Harkins arrived soon after with a couple of other officers. Joe was a big guy, always quick with a joke, and his presence was reassuring. We spread out, covering more ground, but still found nothing. It was like Frank had vanished into thin air. As night fell, we had to call off the search, planning to resume at first light. I headed home, but sleep didn't come easy. My mind was racing, replaying every step I'd taken, trying to think of anything I might have missed. The next day, we were back in the woods. This time, we brought in canine units. The dogs picked up Frank's scent near the trail, but lost it near the riverbank. We found his hat and a flashlight, but no other signs. It didn't make sense. Frank knew these woods like the back of his hand. He wouldn't just wander off, and there were no signs of a struggle. Days turned into a week, and still no Frank. The town was on edge, everyone whispering theories and speculating. Some folks thought he'd had a heart attack and fallen into the river, but divers found no trace of him. Others thought maybe he'd been attacked by a wild animal, but there were no tracks or evidence to support that. I couldn't let it go. I spent my off hours combing through the woods, looking for anything that might explain what happened. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I stumbled upon something strange. A clearing deep in the woods, one I hadn't seen before. In the middle of the clearing was an old abandoned cabin, half hidden by overgrown brush. I approached cautiously, my hand on my service weapon. The cabin looked like it hadn't been touched in years, the wood rotting and windows broken, but something about it felt off. I pushed open the door, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. Inside, the air was musty, and dust motes danced in the fading light. I found a makeshift bed, a table with some old cans of food, and a stack of newspapers yellowed with age. The papers were dated from the late 90s, and they all had articles about missing persons. My heart pounded as I rifled through them, each one telling a similar story. Someone had gone missing while walking in the woods, never to be seen again. I snapped a few photos with my phone and headed back to the station, my mind racing. I showed the photos to Joe and the chief, but they didn't see the connection I did. The chief told me it was probably just some old hermit's hideout, nothing more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister at play. A few nights later, I decided to go back to the cabin, this time prepared. I took a flashlight, my gun, and a sense of determination. The woods were eerily silent as I made my way back to the clearing. As I approached the cabin, my flashlight flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Inside, the cabin was just as I'd left it, but I noticed something I'd missed before. A trapdoor in the floor, partially hidden by a rug. I moved the rug aside and pried the door open. A ladder led down into darkness, the air below cold and damp. I climbed down, my flashlight barely cutting through the gloom. At the bottom, a narrow tunnel stretched out before me. I followed it, my steps echoing in the confined space. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened up into a larger room. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. The walls were covered in photos and newspaper clippings, all of missing persons, including Frank. In the center of the room was a chair, and on the chair was Frank, bound and gagged, but alive. His eyes widened in shock and relief when he saw me. I rushed over, freeing him from his restraints. He was weak and dehydrated, but managed to whisper a hoarse, "Thank you." I helped him to his feet, and we made our way back through the tunnel, moving as quickly as his condition allowed. As we emerged from the cabin, I heard a noise behind us. I turned to see a man standing in the doorway, a wild look in his eyes. He was tall and gaunt, with a scraggly beard and eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. "Leaving so soon?" he said, his voice raspy and menacing. I drew my gun, aiming it at him. "Stay back," I warned, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The man laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the woods. "You think you can stop me?" He lunged at us, and I fired. The shot rang out, and the man dropped to the ground, clutching his shoulder. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up again. I helped Frank to the car, and we sped back to the station. Frank was taken to the hospital, where he made a slow but steady recovery. The man, identified as Randall Green, a drifter with a long history of mental illness, was arrested and charged with multiple counts of kidnapping and attempted murder. He confessed to abducting Frank and several others over the years, holding them captive in that cabin for reasons he couldn't fully explain. The town was rocked by the revelation, the sense of safety shattered. People started locking their doors at night, and the woods that had once been a place of solace became a source of fear. But for Rose, having Frank back was all that mattered. As for me, The whole ordeal left me questioning a lot of things. I still patrol the streets, still enjoy a good cheeseburger and a cold beer. But there's a part of me that's always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. The woods may have given up their secret, but the scars remain, a reminder that even in the most peaceful places, darkness can lurk just beneath the surface. My name is Gus Kalama, and this happened to me back in 2010. I was a cop in a small town in Oregon, not far from Portland. I lived with my wife Maria and our two kids, Jamie and Laura. I always liked the predictability of my job. Sure, there were the occasional bar fights, but mostly it was speeding tickets and noise complaints. You know, the usual small town stuff. One night I was on the graveyard shift. It was just after midnight, and I was parked at the side of the highway, sipping lukewarm coffee from my thermos. I brought my laptop with me, intending to catch up on some paperwork. That's when the call came in. Possible 10:54 at the old Jenkins farm. Neighbor called it in. Screaming and loud noises, the dispatcher said. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight, and headed over. The Jenkins farm had been abandoned for years. The family moved out in the late 90s, and the place had been empty ever since. It was a local haunt for teenagers looking for a scare, but this sounded different. I pulled up to the farm, the moon casting an eerie glow over the dilapidated buildings. I could see a light flickering inside the main house. As I walked towards the porch, I heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Instinct kicked in, and I drew my weapon, my heart pounding. "Cops, show yourself," I shouted, moving carefully towards the door. It creaked open with a nudge from my foot, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. There was blood on the floor, leading into the living room. My stomach churned as I followed the trail. Inside, I found two bodies. One was a young woman, barely in her 20s. The other was a man, mid-30s, with a gun in his hand. Both were dead, the smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air. I called it in, requesting backup and an ambulance, though it was clear neither of them would need it. As I waited, I began to search the rest of the house. Something about the scene felt off. Why would two people be here in the middle of the night? And what led to this violent end? I found a small room off the kitchen that looked like it had been used recently. There were sleeping bags, food wrappers, and a few bottles of water. Someone had been staying here. As I was taking it all in, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, my flashlight catching a shadow moving across the hallway. My breath caught in my throat as I moved to follow it. The old floorboards creaked under my boots, and I found myself in what used to be a study. The room was empty, but the window was open. I stepped closer and felt a sharp pain in my neck. Before I could react, everything went black. I woke up in a dark, damp basement. My hands were tied behind my back, and my head throbbed where I'd been hit. The room was lit by a single bare bulb, and I could see shelves filled with jars and old tools. It smelled musty, like mold and decay. "Glad to see you're awake," a voice said. It was a man standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out his face, but he sounded calm, almost friendly. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Answers," he replied, stepping into the light. He was tall, with a gaunt face and piercing blue eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "You see, Gus, can I call you Gus? I need to know what you found out," he continued, leaning against a workbench. "I've been looking for something, and I think you might have stumbled upon it." I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew I had to stay calm and buy myself some time. "I don't know what you're looking for, but you've got the wrong guy," I said. He smiled, a cold, chilling smile. "We'll see about that." He started asking me questions about the Jenkins farm, the people I'd found, and if I'd seen anything unusual. I told him the truth. I didn't know anything more than what I'd found. He didn't seem convinced. Hours passed, maybe more. I lost track of time. My head was still pounding, and the damp cold of the basement was seeping into my bones. He would leave and come back. each time with more questions. Sometimes he'd just sit and watch me, which was almost worse. Then, out of nowhere, he snapped. He grabbed a wrench from the workbench and came at me. I braced myself, expecting the worst, but he stopped inches from my face. "You're lying," he hissed. "I know you've seen it." Before I could respond, there was a noise from upstairs. Someone was shouting, and I heard the sound of footsteps. My captor looked panicked for the first time. He glanced at me, then back towards the stairs. "Stay here," he ordered, as if I had a choice. He disappeared up the stairs, and I heard the door slam shut. I struggled against the ropes, trying to free my hands. The noise from upstairs got louder, and I could hear what sounded like a fight. Finally, I managed to loosen the ropes enough to slip one hand free. I worked quickly, untying the rest and looking around for something to defend myself with. I found a rusty pipe and gripped it tightly. The door burst open, and two men came tumbling down the stairs, locked in a struggle. One of them was my captor, and the other was a guy I didn't recognize. They were both shouting, but I couldn't make out the words. I took the opportunity to slip past them and head up the stairs. I emerged into the kitchen and saw another man lying motionless on the floor. Blood pooled around him, and I realized he was dead. My heart raced as I moved towards the front door, but I stopped when I heard a faint cry. It was coming from the living room. I edged closer, peeking around the corner. There, tied to a chair, was a young girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her face was streaked with tears, and she looked terrified. I quickly untied her, whispering reassurances. "It's okay. I'm here to help. We need to get out of here." She nodded, clutching my hand as we made our way to the door. Just as we were about to step outside, I heard a shout from behind. My captor had freed himself and was coming after us? I pushed the girl outside and turned to face him. "Go, run to the road and flag down a car," I shouted. She hesitated for a moment, then took off. My captor lunged at me and we both crashed to the floor. The pipe slipped from my grasp and he pinned me down, his hands around my throat. I gasped for air, struggling to break free. My vision started to blur and I felt myself slipping away. Then there was a gunshot. My captor's grip loosened and he fell to the side, clutching his shoulder. I looked up to see the girl standing in the doorway, a gun in her shaking hands. She'd saved my life. I managed to get up and grab the gun from her. "Good job," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay close to me." We made our way back to my car and I called for backup. It felt like an eternity before they arrived, but when they did, it was a whirlwind of activity. EMTs checked us over, and my colleagues secured the scene. The girl, whose name was Ellie, was reunited with her parents later that night. They'd reported her missing 3 days ago, and she'd been held captive in that house ever since. As for my captor, he turned out to be a drifter with a long history of violence. He'd been squatting in the Jenkins farm, using it as a base for God knows what. The other two men I found dead were his accomplices, though what exactly they were involved in, we never fully uncovered. Drugs, trafficking, maybe worse. The details were murky, but it didn't matter much to me. All I cared about was that Ellie was safe, and that bastard was behind bars. I took a few days off to recover and spend time with my family. Maria was shaken, but supportive. "You're a hero," she said, hugging me tightly. I didn't feel like one. I was just doing my job. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal. I went back to work, and the Jenkins farm was boarded up for good. My name is Donovan Mills, and this happened to me a couple of years back when I was just a small-town cop in Rockfield, Indiana. I wasn't some big city detective. I dealt with minor crimes, petty thefts, and the occasional bar fight. I grew up here, knowing almost everyone by name. My parents had a little diner on Main Street where I spent most of my teenage years flipping burgers and washing dishes. I never expected anything too crazy to happen here. It was a quiet Tuesday evening. I remember because I had just finished my mom's famous meatloaf at the diner. and was heading back to the station for another uneventful night shift. Rockfield was the kind of place where you knew all the troublemakers by first name, and you could count the serious crimes on one hand. The station phone rang just as I was about to settle in with a cup of coffee. Dispatch told me there was a missing persons report. A young woman named Tessa McGraw hadn't returned home after her evening jog in the park. Her boyfriend, Alan, sounded frantic over the phone. Tessa was a well-known local, a school teacher, and it wasn't like her to disappear without a word. I drove out to meet Alan at their place, a small house on the edge of town. He was pacing the front yard when I pulled up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Officer Mills, thank God you're here," he said, his voice shaky. "Tessa went for her run around 6 p.m. She usually takes about an hour, but it's been over 3 hours now. I've called everyone, and no one's seen her." "Calm down, Alan," I said, trying to soothe his nerves. "Where does she usually run?" "She likes the trail around Pinewood Park," he replied. "I drove around there but didn't see her." I knew the park well. It was a sprawling area with dense woods and winding paths, perfect for joggers and dog walkers. I decided to check it out, figuring she might have twisted an ankle or something. Alan wanted to come along, and I didn't see any harm in it, so we both headed out to Pinewood. The park was eerily silent as we arrived, the kind of quiet that makes you uneasy. We split up to cover more ground, Alan taking the main trail while I checked the less frequented paths. About 20 minutes in, I found Tessa's phone lying on the ground near a bench. The screen was cracked, but it was still on, displaying several missed calls from Alan. "Alan!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. He came running over, breathless. "Found her phone," I said, showing him. He looked pale, and I could see the fear in his eyes. "Something's wrong, Officer Mills. Tessa wouldn't just leave her phone." I agreed. Something was definitely off. We searched the area thoroughly, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. I radioed for backup, and soon we had a small team combing through the park. Hours passed with no leads. Alan was beside himself with worry, and honestly, I was starting to feel uneasy too. Rockfield wasn't the kind of place where people just vanished. I decided to expand the search to the surrounding areas, including the abandoned mill just outside of town. It was a long shot, but at that point, we were desperate. I drove out to the old mill, the structure looming in the darkness like a forgotten relic. The place had been shut down for years, a haven for local kids looking for a thrill and the occasional drifter. I'd been there a few times to break up parties, but it was always empty otherwise. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I entered the main building, the sound of my footsteps echoing off the walls. The place was a mess of broken machinery and rusted metal, a labyrinth of shadows and dust. I was about to turn back when I heard a faint noise coming from the basement. It was a muffled cry, almost too soft to hear. "Tessa," I called out, my voice steady despite the fear creeping up my spine. I moved toward the sound, my flashlight trembling slightly in my hand. The basement door creaked open, revealing a set of narrow, rickety stairs. I descended slowly, each step groaning under my weight. The air grew colder as I reached the bottom, the smell of mildew and decay filling my nostrils. My flashlight beam caught a glimpse of movement, and I turned quickly. There she was, tied to a chair in the corner, her face bruised and bloodied. "Tessa." I rushed over, cutting the ropes with my pocket knife. "It's okay, you're safe now." She was barely conscious, muttering incoherently. I grabbed my radio to call for an ambulance when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there he was. He was a tall, lanky man with wild eyes and a dirty, disheveled appearance. His clothes were torn, and he held a knife in one hand. "Who the hell are you?" I demanded, keeping myself between him and Tessa. "Just someone trying to have a little fun," he said with a twisted grin. I reached for my gun, but he lunged at me, slashing wildly. I dodged and managed to knock the knife out of his hand. We struggled, rolling on the grimy floor, trading punches. He was surprisingly strong, his wiry frame belying his strength. I managed to get the upper hand, pinning him down. "Alan, get down here," I shouted, hoping Alan had followed me to the mill. Within seconds, Alan burst through the door, his eyes wide with shock at the scene before him. "Call 911, I yelled, still holding the man down. Alan fumbled for his phone, dialing frantically. The man beneath me thrashed, trying to break free, but I held him firm until I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. Backup arrived quickly, and we got Tessa out of there and into the waiting ambulance. The man was cuffed and taken into custody, still grinning that same twisted smile. "This isn't over," he hissed as they dragged him away. Tessa was rushed to the hospital, and Alan went with her. I stayed behind to secure the scene, my mind racing with what had just happened. Rockfield wasn't the kind of place for this kind of madness. I knew things would never be the same after that night. In the following days, we learned more about the man who had taken Tessa. His name was Harvey Long, a drifter with a history of violence and mental illness. He had wandered into Rockfield a few weeks earlier, staying under the radar until he found his next victim. The thought of someone like him lurking in our town sent chills down my spine. Tessa recovered physically, but the trauma of what she went through would take much longer to heal. Alan never left her side, his devotion a small light in the darkness of those days. The community rallied around them, offering support and comfort. Harvey Long was charged with kidnapping, assault, and attempted murder. During the trial, he showed no remorse, often laughing at the recounting of his crimes. The jury didn't take long to convict him, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. My name is Dexter Salazar, and I was born and raised in a small town in northern Maine. It's a quiet place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing much happens. That's why I became a cop. I figured I'd keep the peace, maybe stop a bar fight now and then, and be home in time for dinner every night. I never expected what happened to me on that cold October night in 2017. I was just finishing my shift at the station. I'd been a cop for 10 years by then. Married with 2 kids, a dog named Rufus, and a mortgage that seemed to grow bigger every year. My partner, Leonard Pruitt, was a good guy. Solid, dependable. We'd seen our share of petty crime, but nothing serious. Not until that night. The call came in around 9. A 911 dispatcher told us there was a disturbance at the old McAllister farm, about 10 miles out of town. The place had been abandoned for years, but every once in a while kids would go there to drink or do drugs. We figured it was just that. We'd show up, scare them off, and be back in time to catch the end of the game. "Looks like we got a party at the McAllister place," Leonard said, grabbing his jacket. "You think it's the Johnson kids again?" "Probably," I replied. "Let's go break it up." We drove out in the squad car, the heater on full blast to fight the chill. The road was dark and winding, the kind that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. We didn't talk much, just listened to the radio and watched the trees blur by. When we arrived, the place looked deserted. The house was a 2-story colonial, paint peeling, windows boarded up. The barn out back was half collapsed, and the whole property was overgrown with weeds. It was the kind of place that gave you the creeps, even in daylight. We got out of the car and started toward the house. There was no light, no sound, just the crunch of our boots on the gravel driveway. Leonard knocked on the front door, but there was no answer. He tried the handle, and it creaked open. "Hello? Sheriff's Department," he called out. Silence. "Great. Now we're trespassing," I muttered. We stepped inside, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The place smelled of mildew and decay. The floorboards creaked under our weight, and the air was thick with dust. We split up, Leonard taking the ground floor while I headed upstairs. The second floor was just as decrepit. I checked each room, finding nothing but broken furniture and piles of debris. It wasn't until I reached the last room at the end of the hall that I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing in the corner, facing the wall. A man. tall and thin, wearing tattered clothes. I drew my gun, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sir, turn around slowly," I ordered. The figure didn't move. "Sir, I said turn around." Still nothing. I took a step closer, my flashlight trained on his back. That's when I saw it. Blood. Dark, wet stains covering his shirt and the wall in front of him. I swallowed hard and moved closer, my gun shaking in my hand. "Dexter, you up there?" Leonard called from downstairs. "Yeah," I shouted back, my voice cracking. "You better get up here." Leonard's footsteps echoed up the stairs, and a moment later he was beside me, his own flashlight aimed at the figure. "What the hell?" he started, but trailed off. "Help me turn him around," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We approached together, each taking an arm. The man was ice cold to the touch. We turned him around, and I almost dropped my flashlight. His face was contorted in a grotesque expression of fear, eyes wide open, mouth agape. His throat had been slit, the wound gaping and raw. "Jesus Christ," Leonard muttered. "Who the hell did this?" Before I could answer, there was a noise from downstairs, a door slamming shut. We both whipped around, guns drawn. "Stay here, I'll check it out," Leonard said, heading back down the stairs. I stayed with the body, my mind racing. Who was this guy? What was he doing here, and who had killed him? I didn't have time to ponder these questions for long. Leonard's voice echoed up from below. "Dex, you gotta see this." I hurried downstairs, my flashlight bobbing in the darkness. Leonard was standing in the kitchen, staring at the back door. It was wide open, swinging slightly in the breeze. On the ground in front of it was a bloody footprint. "Someone's out there," Leonard said, his voice tense. We stepped outside, flashlight sweeping the yard. The night was eerily quiet, the only sound the wind rustling the trees. We followed the footprints, which led around the side of the house and into the barn. The barn was a wreck, half of it caved in, the rest filled with rusted tools and old hay bales. The footprints led to a trapdoor in the floor, slightly ajar. Leonard looked at me, his face pale. "You ready for this?" he asked. I nodded, gripping my gun tighter. We lifted the trapdoor, revealing a set of stairs leading down into the darkness. The smell hit us immediately, the stench of rot and decay. We descended slowly, our flashlights barely piercing the gloom. The basement was a nightmare. Bodies, at least a dozen, some of them barely more than skeletons, others fresh enough to still be recognizable. All of them had been mutilated, their faces twisted in the same expression of terror as the man upstairs. "Holy shit," Leonard whispered. "What kind of sick bastard?" That's when we heard the noise behind us. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the stairs. We turned, flashlights illuminating the figure descending toward us. He was a tall man, bald, with a scar running down the side of his face. He was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the light. His eyes were cold, devoid of any emotion. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Drop the knife," Leonard shouted, raising his gun. The man just smiled, a chilling, empty smile. He moved quickly, faster than I could react. Leonard fired, but the man was already on him, the knife slashing through the air. Leonard screamed, dropping his gun as he fell to the ground. I fired then, the sound deafening in the confined space. The man staggered, blood blossoming on his chest. He looked at me, his eyes still cold, before crumpling to the ground. I rushed to Leonard, but it was too late. He was gone, his throat slit, the same expression of terror on his face as the others. I sank to my knees, the reality of what had just happened hitting me like a ton of bricks. I called for backup, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the radio. The rest of the night was a blur, flashing lights, paramedics, detectives. They took my statement, asked me a million questions, but I could barely think straight. The man we shot was identified as Charles Harlan, a drifter with a history of violence. He'd been living in the McAllister place for years, using it as his personal slaughterhouse. The bodies we found were his victims, all of them missing persons from the surrounding towns. In the days that followed, the town was in shock. Leonard's funeral was a somber affair, the whole community turning out to pay their respects. I stood by his grave, feeling a hollow emptiness inside. I'd lost a partner, a friend, and nothing would ever be the same. I took some time off after that. Needed to get my head straight, spend time with my family. My kids didn't understand what had happened, and I didn't have the heart to explain it to them. My wife, Clara, was a rock. She kept me grounded, helped me get through the worst of it. When I finally went back to work, things were different. I was different. More cautious, more wary. The town felt different too, a little less safe, a little more fragile. But life went on, as it always does. We rebuilt, we moved forward. I'll never forget what happened that night. The faces of the victims, the terror in Leonard's eyes, the cold, empty smile of Charles Harlan. It changed me, in ways I'm still coming to terms with. But I'm still here, still doing my job, still trying to keep the peace in this quiet little town. My name is Gideon Thurber, and this happened to me during my 3rd year on the police force in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. I've always loved this town. My wife, Clarice, and I have a small house just off Main Street. We met in high school and stayed together through college, getting married right after graduation. We don't have kids yet, but we've got a dog, Rufus, and a cat, Whiskers. Life was simple, and I liked it that way. I joined the force because I wanted to do something meaningful, something that felt important. I liked the idea of being part of a community, helping people out when they needed it. I guess I always had a bit of a hero complex, but who doesn't when they're young? Most days' work was routine. Traffic stops, noise complaints, the occasional petty theft. Hazleton's a quiet place usually. But then there was this one week in July. It started with a missing persons report. The Thompsons, who live a few blocks away, reported their teenage son, Evan, missing. Evan was a good kid, not the type to run off without a word. His mom, Gloria, was frantic, and his dad, Tom, was barely holding it together. We organized a search, but there wasn't much to go on. No sign of struggle, no obvious reason why he'd disappear. 2 days later, another report came in. This time, it was a woman named Nora Walsh. She worked at the diner on Elm Street, and her shift ended late. Her car was still in the parking lot, but she was nowhere to be found. Just vanished. The whole town started to feel uneasy. It wasn't like Hazleton to have people go missing, let alone 2 in a week. The chief, Samuel Delaney, called everyone in for a meeting. Chief Delaney was a big guy with a booming voice, and he didn't like things going wrong on his watch. "All right, folks," he said, looking around the room. "We've got a situation here. 2 people missing in a week. We need to find them, and we need to find them fast. Pair up, cover as much ground as you can. Talk to everyone. Someone has to know something." My partner, Miles Garrison, and I were assigned to canvass the downtown area. Miles and I had been partners since I joined the force. He's a good guy, a bit older than me, with a dry sense of humor that I've always appreciated. As we walked down the street, we talked to shop owners, people on the sidewalks, anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual. We stopped by the diner where Nora worked. The place was busy as usual. The owner, Joe Romano, was behind the counter, looking more stressed than I'd ever seen him. "Joe, you got a minute?" I asked, leaning on the counter. "Yeah, sure, Gideon. This about Nora?" "Yeah," I said. "Anything strange happened the night she disappeared? Anyone hanging around that shouldn't have been?" Joe wiped his hands on a towel, shaking his head. "Not that I saw. Nora finished her shift like usual, said goodnight, and that was it. I didn't see anyone following her or anything." It's like she just vanished into thin air. We thanked Joe and continued our rounds. The more people we talked to, the less we seemed to know. It was frustrating, like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Miles suggested we take a break and grab a coffee at the cafe down the street. As we sat there sipping our coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something obvious. "You think these cases are connected?" I asked Miles. He shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be a coincidence, but two people don't just disappear for no reason. There's got to be something tying them together." Just as he said that, our radios crackled to life. "All units. We've got another missing person report. Third one this week. Female mid-20s, last seen near the park. Name's Lily Thompson." I looked at Miles and he looked at me. "Lily Thompson," I said. "That's Evan's sister." "Yeah," Miles said, frowning. "This is getting weird, Gideon." We headed to the park, where we met up with a couple of other officers already on the scene. Lily's parents were there too, looking even more distraught than they had when Evan went missing. Gloria was in tears, and Tom was pacing back and forth, clenching and unclenching his fists. "What the hell is going on, Gideon?" Tom shouted as we approached. "First Evan, now Lily? What are you guys doing to find them?" "We're doing everything we can, Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "We need you to tell us everything you know. When did you last see Lily?" "She went for a run in the park," Gloria sobbed. "She always goes for a run in the evening. She should have been back by now. We found her phone on the trail." We spread out and started searching the park. It was a large area with dense trees and winding paths. As I walked through the trees, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't normal. Something was very wrong here. I was just about to radio in when I heard a scream. It was coming from the direction of the old maintenance shed at the far end of the park. I ran toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got there, I saw a figure standing over something on the ground. As I got closer, I realized it was a man, tall and thin, with a wild look in his eyes. He was holding a knife, and on the ground in front of him was Lily, bleeding and unconscious. "Police! Drop the knife!" I shouted, drawing my gun. The man turned to look at me, a twisted smile on his face. "You're too late," he said, his voice eerily calm. "They're all mine now." I didn't wait for him to make a move. I fired, hitting him in the shoulder. He dropped the knife and fell to the ground, screaming in pain. I ran to Lily and checked her pulse. She was alive, but barely. I called for backup and an ambulance, then kept my gun trained on the man as I tried to keep Lily conscious. "Stay with me, Lily," I said, my voice shaking. "Help is on the way." Miles and the other officers arrived a few minutes later. They cuffed the man and took him into custody while I rode with Lily in the ambulance to the hospital. She was in critical condition, but the doctors said she had a fighting chance. Back at the station, the man we arrested was identified as Carl Richter, a drifter with a history of mental illness. He'd been living in the woods near the park for months, unseen by anyone. When we searched his campsite, we found Evan and Nora's bodies buried in shallow graves. The whole town was in shock. Hazelton had never experienced anything like this. Over the next few days, the story unfolded. Carl had been targeting people at random, following them until he found the right moment to strike. He'd been watching the park, waiting for someone to be alone. It was a nightmare none of us had seen coming. Lily pulled through, but she was never the same. The trauma of what she'd been through left deep scars. The town held a vigil for Evan and Nora, and the sense of loss was palpable. It was a hard time for all of us, but we did our best to support each other and move forward. As for me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let everyone down. I replayed the events over and over in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. The chief told me I did everything right, but it didn't feel that way. I took some time off to be with Clarice, trying to find some sense of normalcy again. Life in Hazelton eventually returned to a semblance of normal, but the memory of that week stayed with us all. We learned to be more vigilant, more aware of the people around us. It was a hard lesson, but one we wouldn't forget. My name is Darian Lockwood, and I'm a cop in Larkspur, a small town in Oregon. Yeah, I know it sounds quaint and all, but being a cop here isn't all coffee and donuts. I live alone, divorced for 3 years now. Just me and my old hound, Gus. He's a lazy old guy, but he keeps me company. This story I'm about to tell you isn't the kind you hear every day, but it happened to me, and it's as real as it gets. It all started one late shift. I was patrolling the outskirts of town near an abandoned warehouse. It used to be a paper mill, but it's been shut for years. A few kids would sneak in now and then, trying to play tough. But this time it was different. I got a call from dispatch. A frantic voice on the other end, a woman, saying she saw someone dragging a body into the warehouse. At first I thought it might be a prank. It wouldn't be the first time. But something about the way she sounded got to me. Her voice was shaking, and she kept saying, "You have to hurry." I pulled up to the warehouse. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I got out of the car, flashlight in one hand, my other resting on my holstered gun. I wasn't armed with anything heavier because, well, it's Larkspur. We don't see much action here. But that night I wished I had more. The warehouse door was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. My flashlight beam cut through the dust, revealing old machinery, cobwebs, and rusted metal. The smell of mold and decay hit me hard. I called out, "Police, anyone here?" My voice echoed back, unanswered. As I moved deeper into the warehouse, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A trail of blood leading behind a stack of pallets. I followed it, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. Behind the pallets, I found the body of a young woman, barely breathing, her clothes torn and blood everywhere. She looked up at me with terrified eyes, whispering, "He's still here?" I radioed for backup, but the signal was weak. I couldn't get through. The realization hit me. I was alone. I checked her pulse. It was faint. "Hang on," I said. "I'll get you out of here." But as I turned, I felt a presence. Someone was watching us. I spun around, and there he was, a tall, gaunt figure, eyes wild, holding a knife that glinted in the flashlight's beam. He didn't say a word, just stared at me with a look that chilled me to the bone. I drew my gun, aiming it at him. "Drop the knife," I yelled. He didn't drop it. Instead, he lunged at me, slashing wildly. I fired, but in the chaos, my shot went wide. He tackled me to the ground, and we struggled. He was stronger than he looked, wiry and desperate. We rolled on the filthy floor, knocking over debris. My flashlight skittered away, leaving us in near darkness. In the struggle, I managed to throw him off and scrambled to my feet. I could hear him breathing heavily in the dark and the sound of footsteps running. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it around, catching a glimpse of him disappearing into the shadows. I ran back to the woman. She was slipping in and out of consciousness. I knew I had to get her out, but I couldn't leave him in here, not knowing what he might do next. But I had no choice. I picked her up, carried her out to my patrol car, and radioed for an ambulance. Finally, I got through. They were on their way, but it would take time. I laid her gently in the back seat and went back in. This time, I was ready. My gun was out, safety off. I moved quietly, listening for any sound. Then I heard it, a faint scraping, like metal on concrete. I followed it to the back of the warehouse, where an old staircase led down to the basement. The air was damp and cold as I descended the stairs. My flashlight revealed a series of small, cluttered rooms, storage areas filled with old tools, boxes, and junk. Then I saw him again. He was hunched over a makeshift table, back turned to me, doing something I couldn't see. "Freeze," I shouted, aiming my gun. He turned slowly, a twisted smile on his face, blood smeared on his hands. In one swift motion he hurled something at me, a piece of metal, sharp and rusted. It grazed my cheek, and I fired, hitting him in the shoulder. He cried out and fell to the ground. I approached him cautiously, kicking the knife away. "Why?" I asked, but he just laughed, a sound that echoed off the walls. I cuffed him, read him his rights, and hauled him upstairs. Backup arrived shortly after, and they took him into custody. The woman was rushed to the hospital. She survived, but barely. Her name was Lila Tamsin, a local college student. She'd been missing for 2 days. Her parents were frantic, thankful beyond words when they learned she was alive. The man, however, was a different story. His name was Elias Thorne. No record, no history, just a drifter who had wandered into town. In his possession, they found items linking him to other disappearances in neighboring counties. He was a serial killer, and I had stumbled upon his lair. The trial was quick, given the overwhelming evidence. Thorne never spoke, not once, not even to defend himself. He was sentenced to life without parole. The town of Larkspur breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the scars remained. For me, it was a wake-up call. I wasn't just a small-town cop anymore. I had seen the darkness that could exist even in the quietest places. Months passed, and life in Larkspur slowly returned to normal. I still patrolled the same routes, but I was more vigilant, more aware. I kept in touch with Lila and her family. She was recovering, though the trauma would never fully leave her. If you're still here, I hope tonight's story helped you drift off, or at least kept you wondering. If you enjoyed it, leave a like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if you're already asleep, well, sweet dreams. This was Sleep Crime Stories. See you in the next case.